Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Andy Blanks with YM360. I'm really excited to have a time today where we can just talk about really the nuts and bolts of building a strong youth ministry culture, building that culture within our youth ministry that really draws kids in, draws students in, and makes them want to be a part. You know, what we want out of our youth ministries, what I want out of my youth ministry is that our students have a sense of belonging, a strong sense of belonging, that they have ownership, that our youth ministries, that our youth group is something that they have a stake in. They've got skin in the game, right? There's so many things competing for our students' time that I want my ministry at my church to be something that my students are completely bought into. And there are things that we can do as youth workers to help create that strong culture, to help create that buy-in. And so I want to talk with you about a few of those today. Now, all of these things, I like the way we talked about this, these 5 components, because they're things we can do, but more importantly, there's things that we can equip or empower our students to do. Because, to me, it almost works against creating a strong culture when all we're doing is we're doing the work, right? We're trying to set the table, we're trying to create all these things. If you really want that buy-in, if you really want your youth group to be more than just a programmed hour in your students' weekly time stuff, if you really want them to believe they're a part of it, they need to be part of building that culture. So I want to talk about 5 different components, things we can do, things we can empower our students to do to build that culture. And the first one is creativity. If we think about culture, if you were to Google how to craft culture, how to create culture, you get a bunch of different answers. But when we think about all over the map, when we think about creating a culture, especially a culture that involves teenagers and that's for teenagers, I want it to be a culture where there's creation happening, where there's creativity, not just from the leaders down, right, but from our students. I want our students to be creating. I want them to be a part of that. I want to be creative in my messaging. I want to be creative in the things we do. But again, I also want to be very careful to try to empower our students in our ministry to be creative as well. There's a bunch of different ways we can do this. The great thing is we're not trying to really create a behavior in our students. This is the way they think anyway. The world they live in, it's one of the most beautiful things about where we are as a culture with technology is that our kids are creators, they're makers. They don't even know, they don't even see themselves as that, but they are. They take pictures and they edit songs and they're making videos. And so one of the things we can do to really empower culture and create culture in our ministries is that we can create situations where our students are being creative and contributing creatively to our ministries. And so that can look like a student worship band. We partner with so many churches around here. I was with a church not too long ago and was blown away by the level of excellence of their student worship band. I looked at the youth pastor, I was like, my gosh, these kids are killing it. And he said, that's their thing. We've got some musicians, we've got some very talented singers and songwriters, and so they're using those creative tools, leading their peers in worship. Let your students do your announcements. Let your students create videos for your announcements. Let your students create and edit videos for your retreats, for your camps. Don't have, maybe it's better if you have somebody on your church staff, right? Maybe if you've got a video guy or a video team, you have that luxury. Maybe it's a better product if they do it, but forget that. Let your students do it. Let them have a hand in creating. There's nothing quite like creating things for your peers to help students buy into your ministry. So again, one of the ways we create culture is allowing your students, you being creative, right, and thinking creatively, but allowing your students to participate in that as well. Communication. Communication is the second element. I want to speak about this just for a second. This topic actually grows out of a magazine article. If you're familiar with YM360, the magazine, I wrote this piece for that, and we just want to kind of flesh it out a little bit more today. But I mentioned in the magazine article, there was a book years ago. So many of us are familiar with Seth Godin, and one of Godin's early books, gosh, I guess it was 10 years or so ago, was called Tribes. And the way Godin talked about communication in tribes has resonated with me ever since, and I've used this framework for years, and I think it's so wise. And Godin talks about communication in 3 ways, and I want to use that framework for how we think about communication as building a strong youth culture. Godin says that we should have three elements of communication. We should be able to communicate from tribe leader to tribe members. Okay, so that's the first one. Tribe member to tribe member, so that's the second one. And then tribe members to outsiders. If we use that framework to think about how we communicate, it really helps us envision how we can create a stronger culture through our communication. The way you communicate to your students, the language you use. Mike Breen, who is an excellent writer on discipleship, that's a very meaningful book I'd love for you to check out if you have the time, Creating a Discipleship Culture. It's a very impactful book for me. Mike says all cultures have a similar language. As we're creating a culture of our youth ministry, the words you use matter. The words you use from the stage, what you call things, how you talk about things, even how you teach, how you preach. You create culture by the words you use, how you as a communicator talk to your students. Is your communication consistent? Are you communicating across multiple mediums? Do you only communicate to your students from the stage or from the front of the room? If you're only doing that, that's only one medium. Consider what it'd be like to, embrace so many different social media apps, right? Maybe you're Snapchatting to your kids or Instagram stories or whatever, right? Embracing multiple avenues and mediums for communication, but making sure your communication is consistent. Your communication to your students helps create culture. And then what are you doing to allow your students to speak to one another? And I'm not talking about just in friendship, right? Like hanging out. I'm talking about meaningful content, culture building content. Are you empowering and setting the stage for your students to talk to one another, to communicate together, tribe member to tribe member, to use Godin's language? How are you setting that table? How are you allowing their voices to be heard and allowing their voices to shape and impact your youth ministry culture? That's a great exercise for you to do with your team, to ask the question, where do we see our students really be able to provide input into how they're shaping culture by how they're communicating with each other? And then finally, how are you speaking to outsiders? How are you empowering your students to speak to outsiders? How are you communicating to those students that are in your community context? They're in the schools, they're peers of your students, but they're not attending church. How are you talking to them? How are you encouraging and enabling and equipping your students to talk to them as well? So, the first two, creativity, communication. What about creating common experiences? Creating common experiences is such an important part about culture. And this is one thing as youth workers that we are preconditioned to do. It's probably the easiest one on the list, right? We get the big buckets. You're going to camp, you're doing a mission trip, you're doing a retreat. Those are creating common experiences. And if you build on those experiences, relationally, if you surround your youth facility with pictures of those experiences, if you bring back videos of those experiences up, you're creating culture. But more than that, I would say, where can you begin to get granular? Where can you get outside of the big buckets of common experiences like camps and retreats? How can you get smaller and more granular? Football games, right? Going to see your kids' basketball cheer competitions, going to see their band contest or whatever, right? Hanging out with your kids playing video games, meeting them for coffee. Those common experiences do more than anything to build culture. And again, I think as youth workers, this is one that's probably most in our wheelhouse. So that's three. The fourth is something that's really important. I want to make sure we camp out here for just a second. And the fourth one is that as we create culture, we have to make sure that we are reinforcing shared beliefs. And you may say to me, Andy, of course we do that, right? I teach the Bible every Wednesday night or whatever. I want to step on your toes here just a little bit, and I hope you do the same for me. We need to always be evaluating how we're teaching, what we're teaching. We've got to create, reinforce these beliefs that we share. We got to make sure that our Bible teaching is theologically sound and that we're teaching kids systematically, that we have a plan, that we're not just hitting topic to topic and our favorite verse, here and there, like that we're actually building culture by reinforcing these shared beliefs. So many of you are familiar with the work of the National Study on Youth and Religion. It started in the early 2000s. There have been different stages of that. One of the findings of that study that's still relevant today, because it's reinforced by studies that come after it, is that teenagers in general have a really hard time articulating the basic tenets of their faith. They say, yeah, I'm a Christian, right? Like I believe in God and I believe the Bible's His Word and some things like that, right? Maybe they know that salvation is through faith and those type things. But when you begin to drill down on the core theological tenets of their faith, studies show that teenagers have a really hard time articulating those. Are you reinforcing core beliefs? See, those core beliefs bind us together. As we think about building a culture, a youth ministry culture, we're bound together by those shared beliefs. The more that you can communicate those to your students, make them a part of your youth ministry, have an environment where maybe you even write out your core beliefs, right? Maybe you even articulate some key theological statements and have them around your youth group. Involve your students, embrace that creativity. Do whatever you can to kind of reiterate and reshape those core beliefs. And finally, the last component of really building a strong youth ministry culture is commitment. Now, this works both ways. We have to have, if we're going to build a culture, we have to have students that are committed to what they're doing. But here's the cool thing. If you embrace these other characteristics, if you've created a strong culture, then they're more likely to be committed. We want them committed. We need them committed. If you're going to build a culture, you have to emphasize commitment. But here's where it gets personal. We have to be committed as well. We have to be all in. Now, listen, you've got to have good boundaries. You've got to have a healthy, work-life balance when it comes to ministry. We don't want you burned out, but you've got to be all in. You've got to be fully committed to this. There's no perfect ministry. As long as there's people involved, there'll never be a perfect ministry. It doesn't matter. You've got to be all in. You've got to be committed. You've got to be consistent. More than anything, your commitment to your ministry will build a culture that draws your students in. I hope this has been helpful to you. I love thinking about these things. It's such a great moment to kind of have this interaction. I'd love to hear from you. Any thoughts you have about building culture, just leave it in the comments section. And again, just thank you so much for what you do. It's a real joy to serve you on behalf of everyone at Y360. And I hope to see you again soon. Take care.